So now we're going to create a series of base joints for this head rig. What I mean by that is that these joints would be used in the face rig regardless of the primary deformation system. So whether we're going to rig this face using direct manipulators, direct controls in the face, or if we're going to rig it using blend shapes, there are a certain number of joints that I'm going to use in the face to give it an underlying structure or underlying level of deformation. What these are going to be are jaw and lip joints. For the lower jaw, lower lips, I'm going to have a series of upper lip joints so I can get some basic curling. And I'm going to have a couple of head pivots as well. Let's switch to a side view here. Change this to template mode. I'm going to use some NURBS curves to sort of draw some guys here. Okay, so create, CV curve tool. Let's reset this. So I'm going to use a linear curve. I'm going to start at the base of the ear. Draw our first jaw joint. So rather than having a single jaw joint, since this is such a long area, I'm going to split this into a number of joints here. Once again, I'm drawing pretty fast and loose here because I know I can go in and edit this later. Okay, so that's what I have. And next I'm going to draw a series of joints for the lip. And these joints get more and more granular as I get to the lips, since we'll need more fine deformation toward the end of the lips here, since there will be a lot of curl in that area. Let's display our CVs. Now go into the component editor and start be a little more precise with these positionings. Once again, rather than having a single joint, this is a pretty large lower jaw area, so I'm going to split it to give it a little more range of deformation. Once again, I got more granular as I got toward the edge of the lips. Okay, I'm going to quickly name this low jaw so I'll know what it is. I'm going to draw a similar curve starting at the bridge of the nose and going down to the end of the upper lips. So I'm not going to have much deformation in this area. If I were, I'd just split this in two, having a joint there, having a joint here, but I'm going to keep this pretty solid for this character. Okay, display our CVs, switch to component mode. Once again, go in and refine a bit more. We can see this cavity here, particularly toward the end. I'm trying to keep it more or less toward the center of this cavity. Okay. quickly rename this, just for clarity later on down the road. Okay, so now I have my lower jaw and lip guides as well as my upper jaw and lip guides. I'm going to create 3 head pivots. At the base of the ear, I'm going to create the main head joint, which will be a parent of both the lower jaw and the upper jaw. But the upper jaw will be a child of another joint, which will have its pivot in the same location. And then on top of all that, we're going to have another pivot at the base of the skull, so that when he rocks his head back, we can rock it back from a pivot closer to where the base of the skull and spine would be. On a human, they actually run pretty close to the surface of the back. I mean, you can feel your vertebrae if you touch the back of your neck. And so when you rotate your spine, it's actually rotating from a pivot much closer to the back and base of the skull than the center. Okay, for those, we're just going to create single joint nodes. Well, let's go in and start drawing the joints here by using just point snap. Gonna bump up the display size of my joints here. Okay, so skeleton joint tool, enable the point snap, start drawing my lower jaw joints. Okay, so with this top joint selected, I'm going to go type in select dash high for select hierarchy. So I've selected all the joints in that hierarchy. Then display their local rotation axes. Show our handles. Okay, so I'm going to switch to component mode and enable the question mark, which is a selection for the local rotation axis component. I'm going to select all these, and since Y is my dominant rotation axis, first let's go back to object mode. Sorry about that, and orient this last joint here. Once again, not a necessary step, but just remain consistent. Okay, so now I'm going to go in and select all these local rotation axes. And since Y is my dominant rotation axis throughout the rest of my rig, I'll keep that as a standard for the head. So I'm going to rotate this in 90 degrees on X so that all the Y axes point out toward the left side of the character. So rotate -R, 90, 0, 0. Looks like I'm going to have to rotate this one -90. Okay, so all these Y axes are aligned. Go back and do some renaming. So modify, search and replace names. Let me reset this. So I've selected the top joint and I have the hierarchy selection or option selected. So I'm going to replace every instance of joint with standard naming convention. Okay, then go in and add J and T to each of these. Switch back to a side view. Then create our upper jaw joints. Once again, using the point snap. Let's select hierarchy command once again and display the local rotation axes. So here I'm going to, first of all, orient my end joint. But here I'm going to orient all of my local rotation axes so that Y is the dominant rotation axis. What I'm going to do, just for ease of animation, is I'm going to orient my y-axes on the upper jaw and lip joints so that they're in the opposite direction of the lower jaw and lip joints. Okay, so we'll rotate these -90 in X, so rotate, -R, -90, 0, 0. Okay. The effect of this is, since their y-axes are opposite one another, if I wanted to simply open the mouth, I can hinge them in opposite directions. Same is true for the lips. If I were going to go in and select the last three upper and lower lip joints and rotate them in Y, I can curl the lips, in and out in an opposing direction. Once again, you can orient these as you choose. Basically, what you think will help you with the animation of your character. But I like, hinging this so that they rotate opposite one another. Let's do some quick renaming. And once again, we go in and add J and T to all of these joints. Except for the end joints, we actually want to add an END suffix, because we really don't need to skin to these joints. Whereas anything with a J and T suffix, we're going to skin to. Oops. Okay, so we have our lower jaw and lips. We'd actually want to rename these lips, low lip. And from here down, we'll go up lip. We'll have the same number of lip joints on both the top and bottom. Just gonna name a few of them here. Okay. I'm gonna switch back to a side view. Select both of the top joints and select high once again, so I can turn off the display of the local rotation axes. Okay. So now we're going to create our head joints. Once again, we're going to have two pivots, one right on top of each other, right at the base of the ear here. Then another pivot at the base of the skull, where the spine, which would be running closer toward the back, would meet with the skull, and we'd have a rotation which is a little more anatomically correct here. It will help with the deformations when we rock the head back. With our joint tool, holding and with point snap still activated, I'm going to create a joint here. Quickly rename this. And then just duplicate that. So edit, duplicate, call this head 2. I'm sorry, head 3. And then create one more head joint toward the base of the neck here. Okay, this is going to be head 1 actually. Let's find this first head 1 and rename this to head 2. So in terms of hierarchy, this will obviously be the first head joint, and everything else will be a child of that. We're going to want to be able to move both the upper and lower jaw joints together as well as separately. So that's why we've created the two head joints at the same pivot spot. Let's create this base hierarchy first. So I'm going to parent head 2 to head 1. This results in this pivot. Then we're going to parent head 3 to head 2. Before we move forward, I'm going to select each of these because their local rotation axes are world based. Do some quick reorientation so that their Y's are rotated 180 degrees or 90 degrees on Z. So rotate minus R 0, 0, 90. There we go. Let's get this last one here. Okay, so now we have this basic head hierarchy here with the 3 head joints. So now we want to be able to rotate both of these joints in unison as well as separately. So we're going to do that by first parenting the lower jaw joints to head 2. So now when we rotate head 2, it rotates the lower jaw joints along with it. If we move up to head 3, the lower jaw joints are not a child. They're on the same level as head 3. So we're going to parent the upper jaw to head 3. So now what we have is we have the base of the skull, a global pivot for the head at the base of the ear, where we can get both the upper and lower jaw. We have a separate pivot for our lower jaw, separate pivot for our upper head, so that way we can get maximal jaw extension. And then another pivot for our upper jaw and lips. There we've created a number of hierarchical pivots for this head rig. So these are our basic joints. So regardless of what system we're using, once again, these are joints that we will either layer direct deforms on top of or blend shapes. Another thing I'm going to do here is we're going to go in and add ear joints. That's something that you, in all likelihood, want to handle with joint deformations and not using clusters or blend shapes for something like that. Okay, so for this I'm going to switch back to a side view. Go back to template mode. We're going to use our NURBS curve once again as a guide. Okay, so start there. Switch to a top view. Go to the base of the ear. Okay, so I'm going to create 3 joints in the ear here. So again, these are very rough. So I'm going to use point snap just to snap them onto the edge of the ear here, and then just manually move them in. So switching to component mode and activating point snap once again. I'm going to select this ear joint here. Oh, let's go back to CV component mode. I'm just going to snap these, just sort of march down the ear here. And here's the end. For this, I'm going to use an edge loop selection so that it's centered along this edge. Then the next one in, I'm going to center it along this ring here. Okay, so switching back to object mode. Let's pick our edge loop selection here. Well, not quite what we want. Well, it looks like this might be easier just to select manually. So I'm going to switch out of that mode and switch to just vertex selection mode. Actually, I'll just paint selections. Okay, so there I've selected this ring of vertices here. I'll create a cluster out of that. So deform, create cluster. I'm going to select another edge loop here. Once again, I'll just go in and manually select these. These will be the very base of the ear. Okay. Create one more cluster. Okay, now I'm going to go in and reactivate point snap and snap these CVs to these two new clusters. Okay, so turning off point snap, I'm going to select these, go to the top view. Let's move these into the center of the ear mass just a bit. I'm going to make an adjustment on this end ear here. Okay, so here's our ear. And get rid of these clusters. Now let's switch to a top view here. And draw another joint chain. So with point snap activated. Yep. Try that one more time. Okay, finally got that right. So let me select hierarchy. Display the local rotation axes once again. Orient this end joint. So once again, what I'm doing for this is I am selecting skeleton, orient joint, and option box. Let me reset this. What this does is it will orient a joint relative to its parent. And unfortunately, I skipped this earlier on. I just breezed through it, just assuming that the previous DVDs have been watched. So what this tool does is it will orient a joint based on its parent. So when I set this to none, what I'm saying is relative to its parent, it will have no orientation offset. Or in essence, it will match the orientation of its parent. So I've set this to none. I hit orient, and it pops that joint to match the orientation of its parent. Okay, there's one adjustment I'm going to make here. I'm going to show locators. I'm going to create a locator real quickly. Create locator. I'm going to move this locator up to this joint here, just using a point constraint. I'm only going to do that so that I can use the locator as a visual guide to roughly match the orientation. We're not going to be doing that much rotation from this joint. Okay, so let's select this local rotation axis and switch to a side view. Actually, this original orientation might work out better. All these orientations actually look pretty good. Since I see the in and out curl as the dominant rotation for this ear, I think with the y-axis pointing upward, that can work out just fine for these ears. We only need a few joints. We don't need that much deformation here. With this number of joints, that should be plenty of deformation for the ears. I'm going to select high once again. What I'm doing is I'm clicking in the command line editor, and it stores a history of commands that you've typed in there. So by hitting the arrow, you can cycle through commands that you've previously typed in. I'm going to select high once again and hide my local rotation axes. And then rename these. Okay, so every instance of joint, so here's going to be the L ear. This first joint I'm going to give an FK suffix, since we're not really going to skin to that, but we will skin to all the other joints, so we'll give them a JNT suffix. All except for the last joint, which will give an END suffix, since it's not really necessary to ever skin to the end joint. And sometimes you can find that useful if you're doing some translation on X or scaling, but typically there's no reason to skin to the end joint, so we'll just name it N so that it's not selected when it's skinned. So now I'm going to mirror this left ear across to the right side. So with the first ear joint selected, I'm going to select skeleton, mirror joint, and option box. Let's reset this. So as we can see here, the YZ plane cuts down the center of the character's face. So there's the YZ plane defined by those two axes. So we're going to mirror across that plane from the left to the right. We're going to leave the mirror function on behavior. And what that will means is it will actually flip one of the axes 180 degrees so that when we select both ears, they'll mirror each other in behavior. So if I rotate this upward, the other joint will, in a mirrored fashion, rotate upwards as well. That's what we get with the behavior. I'm going to search for underscore L underscore left side and replace it with underscore R underscore. So it will rename the side token in our name here. If I hit mirror, so now we have right side ear joints. So I'm going to parent these into the main head rotation. When I rotate this head 3, I'm really going to want my ears to stay in place. I'm going to want them more a deformation related to this head 1. So I'm going to select both these ear joints, shift select head 1, and parent them. So now when we rotate head 1, it's moving everything. Step down to head 2, and it will leave the ears behind. Once again, this whole hierarchy is flexible depending upon your character designs and the type of deformations you see with your character. And one thing that you shouldn't be afraid to do is to experiment with the hierarchy. I mean, this, you may build this and decide later on that, well, maybe I want the ears parented to the lower jaw. It's something that you can do a rough skin, test it out, unskin it, and change the hierarchy. Or even when it's skinned, there's nothing to stop you from just reparenting these to a different joint. Okay, so here we have all of our basic joints built. We have a base skull rotation. We have a center head rotation that will move all of the upper and lower jaw. A child of that is we have a separate lower jaw and lip rotation, an upper head rotation. So with the combination of these two joints, we can get a very broad mouth rotation. The same is true with the general jaw joints. They're opposite one another. We can get a pretty broad mouth rotation here for both the jaw as well as the lip joints. And then we have our ears. So once again, regardless of directiforms or blend shapes, these basic joints here will allow us to add in a base level of deformations, and we can then build either system of deformation on top of that, either the directiforms or the blend shapes. But these are the typical joints that I'll start with a standard human or humanoid face. Lower jaw, upper jaw, a double hinged head so that we can move the upper and lower jaw and lips together, as well as hinge the upper jaw separate of the lower jaw. I'll have a base skull joint, and then the ears. Okay, so now we've built our joints, our base joints, built our base hierarchy, and now we're going to move into just smooth skinning this, and then we'll have the foundation upon which we'll build both the directiforms and then the blend shapes.